good leaders, most often as they're listening, they're also thinking about what they're going to say next. Whereas exceptional leaders are thinking about listening and thinking about empathy as a real-time intelligence system.
This is Building Brand Gravity. I'm Anne Green.
And I'm Steve Halsey. Welcome back to our viewers and listeners. And Anne, have we got another great episode for them?
I agree. Later on in the podcast, we're excited to share a conversation I had with David Grossman of the Grossman Group. That's a consultancy he founded 25 years ago, focused on organizational change and leadership and communications. But David is also the author of a new book, here it is, titled The Heart Work of Modern Leadership, 6 Differentiators of Exceptional Leaders. And that's what we're going to dig in together. And in it, he explores the kind of leadership needed in this moment of, I think we'd all agree, unprecedented complexity. Unprecedented, Steve. We can't get away from that word.
Unprecedented.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, Steve, David commissioned research with friends of the pod, the Harris Poll. We've had them on often. And the research found as a top line, a lot more detail in the book, that only 30% of leaders meet the fast evolving needs of today's workforce. And my discussion with David is all about the kind of mindset needed to go from good to really exceptional leadership that, as David says, integrates both the heart and the head, which he finds to be very important, and helps to build teams that thrive and innovate even when under great pressure, which I feel the environment is right now. So before we get into my discussion with David, I thought it would be fun to pose a question to you, Steve. What do you feel are the leadership qualities that support resilience in uncertainty and the ability to advance organizations and people no matter what the environment? Easy question for you, Steve. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Anne. And honestly, it's one right now that feels less theoretical and more operational. So I think for me, it comes down to really kind of 3 qualities that you need to see consistently in leaders. And it's that ability, as you said, to navigate uncertainty versus just react to it. And I think that's an important nuance. First is clarity under pressure. Not certainty, but clarity. That's that ability to step back, to make sense of the complexity and articulate a direction that people can align to. So basically, in a moment like what we seem to be constantly in these days, everything is moving faster. It feels more ambiguous. Teams don't need perfection. They just need a clear signal of where to go. The second, and I think this is really important, I'm going to throw air quotes around it. I call it adaptive conviction. The best leaders I know, they do hold strong points of view, but they're not rigid. They're willing to evolve as new information comes in. And really, it's that balance between confidence and curiosity, knowing where you're going, but staying open, how to get there, maybe some detours along the way, that I think is really critical. And third, and you really talk about this a lot, and I think it's an important part of your leadership style, is intentional connection. And I think that's where David's work really resonates, is really this idea that it's just as important for the mid and long term to not just focus on those outcomes, but really what is that environment that you're creating where people can actually perform their best, to know what's expected of them, to be empowered to make those decisions if they have a clear direction to go. And that requires trust, empathy, and a real understanding of what motivates and challenges, your team. So I think when you put all 3 of those together, the clarity, the adaptability, and the connection, you get leaders who can not only withstand uncertainty, but I think actually thrive in it and move their organizations and their teams through it. What about you, Anne? What are the leadership qualities that you think are most needed today?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this a lot, no surprise, both for our group as a whole and our 2 agencies, but also our clients. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge it's not an easy time to lead or be led. Humans like certainty, and we don't have an abundance of that right now on many fronts. But I really like the ones you shared, Steve. Very resonant for me, especially the idea of having both vision and conviction, yet remaining really highly adaptive and flexible. I like that one a lot. Here are the three ones that I thought about, knowing I was going to ask you the same question. So I think first, emotional intelligence to me is more important than ever. And that really starts with knowing yourself as a leader, understanding how what you are feeling can unconsciously drive both your perceptions and your behavior if you're not plugged into it, and making clear and informed choices about how you act and interact in the moment. That to me is all really critical to building the relationships and really the trust that are so needed today. And that connects back to me to another podcast conversation you had with Dr. Rochelle Ford of Page about confidence in business, like the trust question. The second one I think is related to some of what you said, which is learning to sit in uncertainty. We are in a time when the unknown is a feature, not a bug, to use the old software metaphor, right? And we can't allow ourselves to be paralyzed by it. We have to get comfortable with faster scenario planning paired with even faster pivoting as new information becomes available. You can't be precious with your plan or your viewpoint. You have to be willing to change, right? And then the third for me, I think a lot about is personal resilience. So it's funny, I was never an athlete in high school or college. I was more on the theater and performing arts side, as many of our listeners know. But I'm thinking of myself more as an athlete now in the context of being a CEO, or both of us being principals of this firm. Like, I need to be intentional about sleep and nutrition and exercise and mental health, and also taking breaks with people I love and things I love to do to ensure that I can bring my best to our teams and our clients. So that's on my mind too. And, Steve, to sum it up, we always talk here at GNS Integrated Marketing Communications Group about creating an environment where our people can be high performance and highly human. That's a both and. I do not believe these are mutually exclusive. And I think David Grossman's book is right in the pocket on that topic, frankly.
Well, that sounds like a great segue to get into your conversation with David. So let's go.
I'm so pleased to be talking to a wonderful person, David Grossman. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Anne. Glad to be here.
So I'll do just a little bit of a bio. I've got it right here. Author, consultant, speaker, a real authority on leadership and change, communications inside organizations, which is an area of great interest for me. I always try to tell my leadership I'd like elite communications inside and outside our own organizations, like the shoemaker's children. If we can't advise others, if we can't do that for ourselves too. But you are founder and CEO of the Grossman Group. Are you 25 years this year, David? Is that right?
We're actually 26, but we're still celebrating, Anne, because you know what? There's just you always can celebrate things, right?
Yeah, it's true. And that's right. I remember that campaign last year, but that's a long time to have a consultancy, and that's a lot of impact you've had on others. And we're here to talk about something I've been really enjoying. It's your book, The Heart Work of Modern Leadership. You see my little tape flags up here. 6 differentiators for exceptional leadership. And the way I like to start, we're going to have a really nice substantive conversation, David, but as people listen to us talk, I love to give them some framing and a lens to look through. So if you could tell our listeners, what should they be listening for as we speak today relative to the book and what you're trying to describe today, what would that be?
So the headline is that there are 3 blind spots that good leaders face today. I don't know about you, Ann, but I'm in that good leader category. And those blind spots are getting in the way of engagement and trust and business results, and specifically how we're rolling out AI successfully. So hopefully we'll talk about those blind spots, but also what are some solutions, some things we can do as leaders and senior leadership teams to get at that.
That is great. And I think that there's some words that we're going to unpack that feel positive, but they're more complicated in the context of what you're writing about, including the word good. So what motivated you to write this book? You've written other books before, and this is really jam-packed. It's actually beautifully illustrated. There's a lot of meaty substance in here. Many, many other leaders' voices are in here as well. But what was the genesis for you, David, in saying, I got to put this all together, and why the heart work, not the hard work, the heart work of modern leadership?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, I talked with leaders about how they were doing, what were they doing, and one of the themes that came out was this idea of there wasn't a playbook, we've never been here before, but I just want to be, and I am being human. And I thought that was really profound. as we think about leadership today. So after the pandemic, all this uncertainty started in our world, of course. And I wanted to get some data then to find out, what does exceptional leadership really look like today? And does that human element is it still as important as it was during the pandemic? And as I've sort of grown up in this field, I've always been curious about the question, what makes leaders great? So it was all about sort of what makes leaders great today, that led us to partner with the Harris Poll and to look at some research around, what do employees think and what are those answers?
Yeah, I love that partnership with the Harris Poll, an organization we all know, and we call Rob and team friends of the pod here because we're always interviewing them about very interesting research they do at the Page Society that you're very familiar with. In fact, Steve Halsey just talked to Dr. Rochelle Ford about that confidence in business data. So, I love that you're grounding this in data. So let me get into some foundational terms here and some of that foundational research, because I think it'll set the stage for everything that's going to come. So some stats that stood out for me, and there are many in the book. This was a very rich piece of research. 54% of employees surveyed rated their leaders as good. Okay, we're going to come back to the word good and trouble the water a little there. But only 30% of employees describe their leaders as exceptional, and another 17%, happily the least, say their leaders feel outdated. So my first question to you is, what is the overall take on these stats? And what does that mean, good versus exceptional? Because that is so critical to understanding what you're trying to express in this book.
So as we were doing the research, I thought the book was going to be about bad leaders, those outdated leaders. But the reality was, when we looked at the data, it's actually more about those good leaders. Because when we asked employees, what does it feel like working for those good leaders? That's where we found those three gaps that were very surprising to me. That less than 20% of employees working for a good leader felt seen, felt heard, and felt like they were reaching their full potential. What I realized is, good leaders were built for stable times. They were trained during stable times. The habits that they have were all around stability. And of course, I wouldn't use the word stable to describe the times that we're in today. They are incredibly uncertain. There's so much change and transformation happening. And this good leadership today is really this invisible gap that I want to bring forward to help leaders think about what may not be seen on the surface. Because when you think 54% good, senior leadership teams would look at that and they'd say, that's terrific. But when you dig deeper, you find out there's really an invisible problem and a big vulnerability that organizations are facing today.
That's really helpful. And I love that surprise that you had, because the idea of being really outmoded or really problematic, just not great, and obviously not great. It reminds me of something I often say to my people as they grow into managers themselves. I often say that when it comes to interpersonal issues or employee growth, now you're talking about leaders, and we'll come back to that. But when we're talking about the growth, I often say that superstars are a little bit more clear cut, and those that are really struggling are kind of a disaster for whatever reason. Maybe it's just not the fit, are more clear cut. It's the folks in the middle, because there's such a huge range of what may or may not be at play there, and it takes a lot of discernment. So tell me again, what are those three blind spots? I think you just said them, but I really want to underscore that for those who are listening.
Yeah, let's go through those. Before we do, let me share two things that good leaders do well.
Good.
Because I'm a big fan of, let's also know what we do well and let's keep doing those things that we do well. So good leaders value the work, value the contribution, and they support the work as well. So they provide direction and insight and answer questions, and they say, thank you and great job, and really value the work. So those are all good things. Good leaders should continue to do that. Then there are the three gaps. So here's the first. Only 16% of employees under good leaders feel that they are valued as a person. So there's a subtle distinction here. We just talked about good leaders value the work. This is about valuing the person behind the work. And that's a significant difference, and that's super important. Second, 19% of employees feel heard. When you hear that stat, leaders often think, oh gosh, it's a listening problem. But it's not a listening problem because you can't hear what people won't say. And people won't say things when they feel like it's risky. So, not feeling heard is really a psychological safety challenge and issue. And then the last is 14% feel they're not reaching their full potential. That's the lowest number that we measured, and that's a retention crisis sort of in the making, if you will. There's a invisible drip behind the wall in our house, and that we don't know about, but now we do know about it because we've got some data, and we need to address it, all three of those gaps.
It's interesting, David, to sit and contemplate the distinction, and I think they are profound, between leadership appreciating the work and the output and being grateful for that and expressing that versus where there feels like a divide between recognizing the person that's doing that work or that person's sense of purpose or value and that they're being actualized or realized within the role. Am I thinking about that right and trying to tease those things out?
Yeah, it's perfect, Anne. So, I'm a big Broadway fan, as you know, and
Me too.
in every musical, the hero early on comes out and they sing what's called an I want song. And it tells you essentially everything you need to know about that hero. So, should we do a little quick test here? So Ariel, for example, what does Ariel want?
She wants to be human or to have
Yes.
legs?
Yes, to be part, yeah, exactly, to be part of our world. Okay, Elphaba.
Exactly.
Elphaba, what does Elphaba want?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those
She
movies are amazing.
she wants to be absolutely sort of herself and be seen as who she is on the inside. One more, we'll to do Hamilton. What does Hamilton want?
The world's gonna know my name. What's your name, man?
Well, exactly, and he wants to make sure he's not gonna miss his shot.
Don't miss yes, exactly.
Yes, so every employee has their own I want song. And the question for us as leaders is, do we know what that song is? Because that song or that story tells us everything we need to know about that person, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, the path that they're on, sort of where they are in their life journey. Super important so that we can recognize that and them instead of just the work that they're doing.
I wanna get at this in a slightly different way, although you may have already said it, but we'll see if there's any distinctions here. What do you think many leaders believe employees need versus those pieces you've just talked about, especially that "I want" kind of piece? What do you think is that gap? What do you think most employers believe and think employees want?
Yeah, I'm not sure that leaders are always thinking about what their employees want and need and how to help them be successful. I think sometimes we as leaders, we're sort of stuck in our heads and our minds. Like we're very clear about what we think and what we need and how we want to proceed and what we want to accomplish. But then the question is, how do we accomplish what we want to accomplish through the very people that we need to help us get there, that have their own ideas and thoughts and perspectives and do want to be trusted and motivated and are a really important information source for us as leaders to make successful decisions.
Do you think the gulf has gotten wider in recent times? We have a few different macro trends or just foundational pieces and threads that I feel could be at play here. There is generational shift. Each generation has a lot of the generational cliches are not helpful, but some of them are very true. And a lot of it has to do with what different cohorts of a generation are living through at any given time. There is the post-COVID environment, the different way work is being done. There is tremendous upheaval. Sometimes I say to my more senior folks, if you look at our more junior staff, in some ways for Generation Z and younger, the social contract has been broken in some ways. But do you and then there's the AI of it all too, obviously, which makes things even more unstable. So it's a lot of that instability you've been talking about. But do you have hypotheses on what some of those macro threads are that may make this a slightly different environment now when you talk about that stability versus instability. Is there more there?
Yeah, I think you captured, the myriad of factors that are making our world much more uncertain than ever before today. And I think then you add on to that the weight that people are bringing into the workplace today. Psychologists call it allostatic load, that sort of emotional weight, that heaviness that I think it's fair to say has never been as high as it is today. And that means that we as leaders are the real variable here. So, and I've been thinking a lot about like, what's the relationship between uncertainty and leadership and the employee experience? And the reality is all of this uncertainty isn't going to change. And, the employee experience is going to be different based on what kind of leadership. So for example, if you take uncertainty times outdated leadership, you're going to get paralysis and disengagement and all those things that we would expect. On the other end of the spectrum, if you take uncertainty times exceptional leadership, you're going to get that safety and trust and advancement and confidence that we all want. But what's so interesting is you have good leadership. You take uncertainty times good leadership. And what we're seeing today and what you're getting is anxiety and complacency and drift. And that's very different than we've seen in the past in stable times. And that means we as leaders need to help our folks, help ourselves first, and then help our folks work through all of this uncertainty and this emotional weight that we carry. And most leaders today, those good leaders, were never trained to deal with all this emotional weight and all of the challenges that we face in the workplace today.
When I read your discussions about the load folks are carrying mentally, and and we can use the more scientific word, or we can say mental load, and as a shortcut. It's funny, in our town hall for my own team in Q1, talking about AI, I had our creative team do a picture of a brain, and I had it labeled AI mental load. And on there was one side of the brain that was lighter. And I spoke to, these are the things we hope to focus on: medical advances, augmented intelligence, greater productivity, human flourishing. But on the dark side of the brain, I said, we are being forced to hold and contemplate a whole host of things. So when you list them all, feel a bit insane. Water use, land use, environmental, job loss, societal disruption, potentially autonomous weapons. I mean, it was a long list, longer than the other side. And I was trying to say to folks, I wanted to name it and say, we have to understand the load we're carrying just on AI alone, not to mention the rest of it. So that very much resonates with me. And I feel like if you can't name it, and also as counselors, so we are in integrated marketing communications. So we also have to serve as counselors to clients. And my attitude about something like AI, for example, as a huge disruptor, is you have to hold both sides, or you cannot speak to it and counsel others, nor follow your own path. But wow, the load of carrying that is a lot, David.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what you're talking about here too, Anne, is just biology, in that we have two operating systems in our brain today. And in the prefrontal cortex, we have the higher level kinds of activities that happen when it comes to creativity and problem solving and all of that. And then there's the primitive part of our brain that's in the amygdala. And that's more like the smoke detector for danger, if you will, today. And, as you go through the list that you just went through, so much of that causes, I think oftentimes about our thinking brain is like it's Wi-Fi. For us, the Wi-Fi goes down, the amygdala gets hijacked, and it's very difficult for us to do our best work and thinking. And so there's some biology too today that we need to recognize and acknowledge. Because if we're not dealing with some of that emotional content or emotional weight in the workplace today, it doesn't take much for someone to go from their thinking brain to that survival brain, which means that they are not as productive and helpful and getting as much work done as possible. So I share all of this because there's some literal biology here that we need to account for. And one of the things that we know, gratitude, as we did the research, was the number one differentiator of exceptional leaders. And part of the value of gratitude and recognizing not just the work, but the person, as we've been talking about, is it short circuits the survival brain. It says to employees, I see you, I value you, you are safe. And that's just a reality that we leaders need to start to figure out and deal with in the workplace today.
I think that's so powerful. Because it also, we've done some training for our leaders on emotional intelligence, which feels more urgent than ever these days to know even what's going on in your own body, whether you practice meditation, mindfulness, emotional intelligence. But I think that practice of gratitude also takes you away from your own alert system. We are, especially those of us in fields like marketing or comms, internal comms, leadership, are really very highly sensitive to risk, looking at possibilities, looking at what could go wrong. And when you are focused on that, that's a natural way that also aligns with that, that ancient system in our brains and bodies. And you have to be alert to that. But I do think gratitude is a way of reprogramming. And that's actually brings us, I'll show it for the camera, the 6 differentiators that you identified. If you could share what those are, I'd love to reflect on those. What are those differentiators of exceptional leadership today? What are the 6 that you've identified and why?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. And I wonder if I can share sort of each of the differentiators and then what good looks
Yes,
like and
absolutely.
what exceptional looks like.
Please
So
do.
so gratitude. Oftentimes good leaders feel appreciation, but they move too fast. They may just say thank you. And we've already talked about they might recognize the work, but not the person. Exceptional leaders slow down, they share gratitude, and they recognize the person. They say, I see you, I see what you did, and it's hugely valuable. They treat gratitude not like fine china. I don't know, does anyone still have fine china, Anne, anymore that you bring out at special occasions? But instead, it's like a cast iron kind of pan that gets better the more that it's used. And to your point too, Anne, gratitude doesn't just feel good for the person receiving it, it also feels good for the person giving gratitude. And so the challenge, the opportunity with this number one differentiator is, can we recognize people? Can we share gratitude 3, 4, 5 times a day? And if we did, how powerful that would be for not just us, but for our people as well.
And how do we do it in an authentic way too, where it doesn't, because I do think that people are very wary and very highly tuned to things that feel not real from the heart. So I think that's a very interesting part of it too.
Absolutely performative. Yeah, people they sniff it out really quickly, and they know when it's real and genuine. That's when it makes a difference, and you can feel it that it's genuine as you're sharing gratitude with folks. So that's the first. The second differentiator is around listening and empathizing. So good leaders, most often as they're listening, they're also thinking about what they're going to say next, for example. Whereas exceptional leaders are thinking about listening and thinking about empathy as a real-time intelligence system. That this listening, this curiosity, this empathy is giving you as a leader information about potentially what weight this employee is carrying, some potential solutions that you might not have thought of. There's so much power or empowerment in listening and empathizing. So that's the second differentiator.
I love you bringing curiosity into that because I think that's extraordinarily important because it's not just I'm going to listen and feel for you or with you. I want to be curious about you. And then I think the other thing you reminded me of that one is that one of those hard manager and then leadership lessons is listening without solutions. That I'm
Mhm.
not going to just fix this situation, right?
Yeah, being hugely curious. I challenged a leader last week in a conversation to only ask questions. In his next conversation, if you only ask questions, it means you're continuing to gather information. It means you're continuing to be curious instead of what we often see. I mean, look, There is way too much telling that happens from leaders and not enough listening. I think we all know that listening is such an important skill for folks to continue to work on. And the advanced skill too, which I would challenge folks to be thinking about, is often thinking about like what is not being said. That's really the advanced skill here. So many conversations, there's an undercurrent or undertone, or there are facts or data that just aren't being shared, and your spidey sense starts to go off. And that's the perfect time to be seeing if you can listen for what's not being explicitly said.
That's great.
All right, differentiator 3, fostering an inclusive culture, which is all about this idea of we're all in this together. So good leaders let culture sort of run from momentum, if you will, and are purposely sort of thinking about culture. Exceptional leaders are thinking about creating that psychological safety that we talked about understanding what their people are carrying, about checking in with them, about asking questions like, what am I missing? Or what truths have you thought of, but you haven't mentioned here? So creating that safety that gives us data and information that we really need and can use, and that can be super helpful to us.
I love that because we know, especially in recent years, the whole concept of inclusivity or inclusive culture as part of the acronym DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's been much abused, to be polite about it. But I also think the principles and practices of DEI were not well defined always. And the idea that somehow it was exclusionary. So the idea of to reflect more on what inclusion might really mean and the kind of supercharging it can do to individuals and culture, and to really sit with that. I love that discussion, David. And I think it's really important that we return to that and we understand that inclusion is still so deep and profound, and it has so much to do with trust and being seen and being heard and feeling like you can have your voice in the room. I mean, there's such a world there for me when you talk about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the data is super clear that folks aren't feeling seen. And that's why, from a framing perspective, I think about it as creating safety so folks can speak their truths, and this idea of we're all in this together. Whatever we're working on, we're working on this collectively to get to an end, and we need everyone's best. And in a lot of cases, we need some different, diverse perspectives if we want to innovate, for example, to get to wherever it is that we want to go. All right. So differentiator 4 then is communicating with context. So good leaders were trained in a time when they had answers. So employees would ask questions and leaders would have answers. In uncertain times today, exceptional leaders share what they know when they know it. And they also share what they don't know, versus good leaders often wait to share information until they have all the facts, for example, and we know what happens then. The information vacuum fills. So better to share what you know, when you know it, and what else you're working on trying to find out.
That one is really critical. I see in client service often, I've advised people over the years, communicate with full context and more fully the first time. So you don't have this situation of telephone game or a bunch of short emails where understanding becomes less and less and frustration gets higher and higher. And I think that idea of how do we, and I was laughing to myself when you're like, in the old days, leaders, people had questions, leaders had answers. And today we can't have all the answers. So I think even recognizing that, how leaders sit in uncertainty and their lack of knowing. I talk sometimes about if I'm confronting something I don't know, it's like I'm opening a fan and every rib of the fan is a possible outcome. And some are amazing and some are horrible, but like kind of taking in all those outcomes. But then how do you share what you know or believe or hypothesize at that time? I think that's a really productive thing to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and think too about like what happens when you say, I don't know, to a team and say, help me. What do you think? What are the possibilities? You're demonstrating being vulnerable. You're opening up the discussion to a lot of people who chances are have some strong and important perspectives that are worth considering that you may or may not have. That's why one of my favorite questions to ask is, what am I missing here as a leader? Like what else is here that I'm not thinking about, that we're not thinking about, which invites others in a safe environment to make a contribution and to help, because we're all in this together, of course. All right, the next differentiator 5 is about connecting strategy to employee growth. So this too gets at the third gap around employees not feeling like they're reaching their potential. So good leaders talk about the why and the what of strategy, why we're going here, and what the strategy is, or what our goals of our team are. Exceptional leaders talk about the why, the what, and the you. So here's our strategy. Here's where we're going here. And here's how you benefit. Here's how you're going to contribute and develop and be part of this, which helps individuals know then that they have some potential. They're going to contribute to what's most important for us.
David, I do have a question on that one, because even our organization, which is smaller than some of the many of the largest companies out there, this really matters for us too. And some of the change initiatives we've been driving, we're talking at the organizational level, the group level, and also to individuals. But one of the things we've been talking about in leadership is how critical it is to spend more time at that one-to-one individual level. Do you feel that's important to make this real?
Oh, absolutely. I think, what do our one-on-ones often look like today? We get with someone, hopefully regularly. And what do we talk about? We talk about the work. What we don't often talk about is sort of the path that they're on, their development plans. What we don't do often is an emotional check-in with them as to how are they doing when it comes to work, sort of what kind of weight are they carrying. So my wish is that we do more one-on-ones with each of our folks, including a one-on-one that is solely about that employee's path and development and career, because that is going to be a kickoff to hopefully ongoing conversations about them. And that tells them that they have a future here, because that now they have some sort of sense of path and how we're going to help them continue to grow, and how we hope that they're going to, of course, stay with our organization.
And I think it's so good. I was kind of leading the witness and asking you to answer that, because I certainly agree. But I do think we all fall into the trap. And there's a lot of things, by the way, as reading this, I look in the mirror and say, I could do better, absolutely. But I think we do. Well, of course, our one-on-ones, we're going to talk about that person's career. But I think there's so much less of that, and so much less about, let me translate this bigger picture strategy to you, and what, not that I have gospel truth on what exactly it'll mean, but this is what we hope it'll mean. This is what we anticipate it'll mean. And I think we can get very caught up. I am in a professional services environment, as you are. And that work and that client responsiveness is paramount. It's why we exist. And yet it goes back to something you said earlier. How do we slow down and open it up more and make that context stick, and really bring it to life for people, make it legible? So, there's so many dots you're connecting for me. I love going through these one by one. Also, this is really helpful.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too. So the last one then is empowering teams to meet the moment. So good leaders build trust when things are going well. They often default to micromanagement when things aren't going as well. Not always, but sometimes. So exceptional leaders proactively look at and think about the well-being of their folks, about their workloads, about their boundaries. We just talked about career development. I would put that in that, category as well. Exceptional leaders are modeling good work-life balance and ensuring that their actions are following their words as well.
That's great. That's great. It's reading the book and looking at even the 6 differentiators. What very much struck me is that this kind of heart-centered or heart-forward, heart and head, which is what you do talk about in here, the two of them, this is not a binary, it's a both and, does not feel like it's currently in vogue, so to speak. There is a hardness to the dialogue, and I think it has to do with the current U.S. administration and just sort of the trickle down of some of the culture around that. There's kind of a bit of a it's cliche, but sort of a hyper masculinity in terms of how people might see that in leadership. I feel like it trickles down a bit, and there's a lot of implications to this. It's sort of the approach of a Doge, or it reminds me very much of the Jack Welch era of GE. Again, an amazing leader in some ways, and a very hard leader in others. And I'm not rocks and glass houses kind of person, but I had clients in the GE ecosystem in the early 90s. So I saw the impact of that kind of leadership firsthand. So I feel in some ways your book is taking this in a very different direction. And I just love your thoughts on this because, as you said, the research points to much of what you're saying in terms of what it means to have exceptional leadership that actually leads to business results and outcome and is very much quantitative as well as qualitative. But what's your reaction to almost having a counter narrative today?
Yeah. Well, I think, the evidence isn't new necessarily, and it's for sure not ideological. I mean, my point of view is very much based on the research, and we're seeing in the media today and a lot of conversation about sort of hardcore CEOs. And I think hardcore from a situational perspective is often needed. It's like, look, we've all seen organizations that the market changes or customers change or there gets to be complacency and some hard decisions need to be made inside the organization. I get it. I appreciate it. I see that we help organizations through those times. But when it becomes a default, I think that's when there's fallout when it comes to hardcore. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, the idea of just focusing on psychological safety is, and not business results at the same time, is not where we want to be either. And so what's really not being talked about here is this invisible gap with good leaders that you and I are talking about today. How employees are feeling, where there are gaps, and where we as leaders can step forward in different kinds of ways to meet their needs and get the results then that I think all of us want.
Yeah, and another thing that's in the culture right now is this idea of founder mode, where you're going to come in and just drive and run everything, which gets into the micromanaging piece. And absolutely, I agree that this does not have to be a binary. We need real business acumen. We need to be ready to make hard decisions. We need to be clear in our own minds about it, but we also need to understand the power of how we relate to others. And it's interesting because some of what you're talking about here reminded me of something that we're working on in my organization. I want to embrace the idea, and I've asked our teams to embrace the idea and explore the idea that we can be both high performance and highly human. And actually, in your introduction, you talk about balance technological advancements such as AI with human connection, balance productivity with well-being and reasonable boundaries, balance business results while also promoting personal growth for employees. And I underline that like start it 17 times because that to me is what I'm hoping to embrace with the both and of high performance and highly human. But what is your reaction to that kind of idea?
Yeah, no, I think it's perfect, and it's exactly what's needed today. I think about it as leading with your heart and your head. So it's not an either or, it is that both and it's knowing when to flex which approach and not also relying on one approach as your like dominant default style. So one of the pieces of research that we haven't talked about yet that I think would be helpful here is when we looked at the attributes of exceptional leaders, 9 out of the top 10 are heart focused. Number 10, by the way, the head focused leads with transparency. And what's so interesting about this data is you may recall Google did a study 2009 or so. They called it Project Oxygen. They admitted they were trying to demonstrate that at this point, that technical skills were more important than managerial skills, so that they looked at managers and markers and technical folks and sort of the markers. And what they found is high performing managers had better engagement, better retention, and better results. And when they looked at what are those markers, 9 out of the top 10 were what they called soft skills. So this is several decades ago, different time, different methodology, but the same results we're seeing here, Anne. And for me, it says we're still not investing in these skills. And one other thing, I need to get on my soapbox for just 1 minute, if you'll allow me.
Oh, please.
I want to retire the word soft skills, because today These are really hard skills. Given the rise of AI and everything we talked about today, these skills are some of the hardest to acquire and some of the hardest to do and execute predictably. So my wish is, let's retire soft skills. Let's call them what they are, which is human skills that are so essential today and more needed in the workplace than ever before.
It's so funny, David. You literally took the words out of my mouth when I was going to chime in. I was going to say soft skills are anything but. And I joke sometimes with my colleagues that there's a reason Harvard Business Review makes so much money. It's because managing is extraordinarily difficult. And we talk sometimes at our firm that the business is a tapestry. All the threads are interwoven and interconnected, and you need to tease them apart and see them individually, but understand how they knit together. And the idea of managing people, being a manager, being a leader, has so many component parts to it, so many threads to it, that I agree. And I think it's very interesting to hear the dialogue around AI from so many quarters that in some ways, I just heard Ezra Klein interview the philosopher and tech pioneer Stuart Brand. And Stuart was saying, he's in his 80s now, but he's seen so much develop. But he was saying that he feels like AI will teach us much more about what it means to be human than anything technological. And we're going to learn those skills that are really unique and powerful. And a lot of it does come to a lot of things you've been talking about. So I find that very timely right now in that AI discussion.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, people who don't use AI well are going to replace people who do use AI well. And I think there's a corollary that people that are human are going to replace people who aren't human in the future, because it's those human skills that help us implement AI effectively, and or it's the human skills that AI can't do that only we can do. So I think about it like there's this human moat, if you will, with the rise of AI. As AI becomes and commoditizes so many of these head skills, there's this human moat. And these are the skills that today, and you said this so well a few minutes ago, and I love the tapestry and threads that we need to pull on, that we need to think about how do we gain these skills, and then how do we start to use them more consistently and predictably inside the workplace. And just one note on predictability, because that's super important. I just wanted to just touch on it. So as we're implementing these human skills, to the extent we as leaders can become predictable, so our people aren't guessing what we're thinking, what we're going to do next, can we become predictable that I'm going to hear you, I'm going to see you, I'm going to create a safe environment, I'm going to help you continue to develop. That's what's needed too with these three gaps.
Well, and that's powerful because you become the source and that foundation of predictability within the unpredictable world, where at least from a behavior standpoint, it's not that sense of, oh, I'm not certain, or on the extreme end, I feel like I'm going to be gaslit or some negative thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like our job is to create some stability with our folks who are bringing this emotional weight into the workplace and dealing with all of this uncertainty. And that means we have to figure out and take care of ourselves first. That's the old oxygen mask idea. So then we can, take care of our people who are going to deliver or not on our plans and strategies and goals.
So I want to wrap up today. I asked you to tell people what to listen for. And now as we end, what are a few actionable things, aside from getting the book, get the book, folks, read the book. I found it to be very rich. You can open it almost anywhere and learn something, especially because we didn't even get into all the anecdotes and stories from the other senior leaders you read, a lot of whom I know. So that was fun. But what are one or two or maybe three things, David, that you would love people to think about doing, adopting, taking on?
So maybe let me give you two from a senior leadership and then one just from a leader perspective. One is, I feel like we need to get data. We need to get data around how are we doing today when it comes to filling these gaps. And engagement data is lagging. We need some leading indicators around change initiatives and how are they faring around sort of voluntary attrition and other sets of data that we have. Just we need to look at that. That would be one. The second is to classify leadership development as risk management, much like regulatory compliance or cybersecurity. Can we think about it not as this need to build that's budgeted, but rather what we're talking about is risk management today as we're filling those gaps and helping leaders with all these skills that are needed that they don't quite have today that are going to help us into the future, including, by the way, help us implement AI successfully. Because if our folks don't feel heard, our folks don't feel seen or aren't reaching their potential, we are not going to effectively implement AI in our organizations because we're not going to be hearing or seeing or getting the data that we need to make it successful. And then I think for leaders, I come back to this idea of gratitude and sort of personal recognition, not just for the work that someone is doing, but for, who they are and how they're helping us get to wherever we need to go. I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do. It's free. We can do it tomorrow. Hopefully we do it several times today, tomorrow, and then beyond.
Well, and it really makes your own life, both as a leader and as a human in the world, much richer and more glass half full. I mean, and I am in turn grateful for your time. This is amazing.
I was going to say the exact same to you.
Yeah, I love having the podcast to have conversations that I really feel matter. And this is a very important one. So, David, thanks for your time and congratulations on the success of the book so far.
Thank you. I'm been just thrilled by the reception and excited. And I'm hoping we can help leaders continue to build the skills that are needed and that we can make the workplace better and that we're all going to feel even better about what we do between 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or whatever our sort of work days look like and we can do it together.
I agree. Well, as always, we invite our listeners to share feedback, hit us up on LinkedIn or by email. And there's been a lot of great episodes this season. So if you've missed some, be sure to check them out. And thanks again for listening to Building Brand Gravity.